Hi, and welcome back. This is episode 5, and it's the 31st of October, and you know October is all about OliTober. So this is the last day that I'll showcase this computer. This is the Olivetti L1 M20. And in the previous 4 episodes, we've gone through the outer and the inner of it. We tested stuff, looked at the power supply, and we even had it booted up, and it is working, which is a thumbs up. During all these episodes, I came across a few things that I needed to wrap up. And this episode is going to be all about wrapping up the things that I discovered and things that I actually want to do with this computer. I want to say to you, been working with this computer for more than a month now. I really love this computer. It is actually awesome. It has a few quirks and weird stuff on it, which I will mention later on today. But all in all, it is, for that time, a cool computer. And just think about what would have happened if IBM didn't come up with their PC and this would have been the standard. Then you would have had 16-bit from the very start on, and you would have had operating systems that were different, screen sizes that were different, color modes that were different, but nevertheless, it is a cool machine. Let me take the camera closer. I have a few things that I want to mention in the front, on the sides, and on the back. Once that's done, I will open this one up again for you, and we will have a peek inside, because I think we need to take a look at the motherboard. Just a brief look so you can actually see the motherboard close up. I also need to talk about the memory cards, so I need to remember to talk about that. And then I want to talk about the extensions that you could have had to this computer. More on this later, so stay tuned. So one of the first things that I would like to mention is the actual name of the computer. It's Olivetti L1 M20. And a few people have already mentioned that L1 means line 1. So that's the series of this computer. It's Italian and it's Linea Uno. Sorry for my very bad Italian. But that's Olivetti Linea Uno, the M20. This computer also came a little bit later with a hard disk drive inserted in here. And those with the hard disk drives were mainly called ST at the end, so M20 ST. This is the label. I want to mention also a few things about the keyboard. First of all, as you can see, and as I mentioned in previous video, there are no function keys. The only function keys that we see up here is the S2 and the S1. Within the actual operating system, you are able to tell the system what functions these two function keys should have. So what you will see is there is no backspace, there is no tabulator, there is no caps lock, and a few other things that are missing on the actual keyboard. I cannot figure out why they decided to leave all these very important keys out, but they are in the keyboard anyway. It's just all a combination of the command key and the control key and other keys up here. So for instance, the backspace, which we would think should be up here, is actually control and H. That means backspace. If you wanted a tab, which could have been like maybe perhaps this one, that would be control I. So there's a whole range of shortcuts within the actual keyboard combining with these two keys to give you additional functions to the keyboard. One thing actually a few things, and that's because I don't have any documentation at the moment. I'm still looking for all the documentation that I can have. As you can see over here, we have arrow keys up here. I haven't figured out how to switch over to the arrow keys yet. I'll figure that out eventually. So that's the keyboard with the naming up here and the weird keyboard here. If I turn it a little bit around and I adjust the camera, I was talking about the serial number on the keyboard. Sorry, on the computer, obviously. This is not a serial number. As another viewer has mentioned, correctly mentioned, obviously, this is a service number. So this computer was under a service from Olivetti. And this guy who wrote to me actually mentioned that 12 means that this is the office of the Deutsche Olivetti GmbH Technischer Kundendienst, and 12 actually means that it's from the area in Germany called Rhein-Main. So that's the 12. The 86 is because it's a service from 1986, and the last number here is just a random number for a service number. So that's that sticker on the side. If we turn a little bit further around and I move it a little bit further away, I just briefly want to mention that obviously here we have for the monitor. Over here we talked about the parallel interface. In here, if I can get it out, we actually have a serial interface. Again, these three are Olivetti proprietary owned, developed plugs, but nevertheless, there's a serial and a parallel interface up here. I will come back to what these three are used for once we have opened up the computer, because you could extend the computer with additional ports. That brings us back to the beginning of the computer, or the front, and I shall take off the cabinets and we will have a peek inside it. So with all the items out of the computer again, I just briefly want to mention that the motherboard itself came into revision. And this revision that I have here is the revision D. And if we have a tiny look up there, I hope we can zoom in. You can see it's the M20 BA055, that's the motherboard, and it's the revision D up here. And again, I'm struggling with having any real documentation about the motherboards itself, and as you may see, there are a lot of dip switches scattered all over the board, and I have no documentation telling me what all the different dip switches are good for. So the only thing I have is this documentation here, which is just a very bad drawings telling me that the revision D has the ROM area down here, memory up here, 3 expansion up there, 3 expansion up there, and then it mentions a lot of all of the dip switches, not all of them, but they don't mention anywhere in the documentation what they actually do. So let me just briefly come back. So we have the CPU here, which is the Zilog Z8001. This is the 16-bit one. The CS on top of this one, this actually means this is a, and let me do it like this, prototype version or developer version of the Zilog. So this is actually a very early board that I'm having in here. Over here we have the 2 EEPROMs for the system, and this up here. This is the memory. This is 128 kilobyte of RAM. And if we have a look at those, so as you can see, it's HM4864-2. 128. And now we come to these three slots. This is for extending the computer with memory. This is the 16-bit bus for extending the computer with external peripherals. So let's have a talk about this. In this one, we saw the memory card, and this one holds 32 kilobyte of RAM. So this means you can extend the computer with a total of 3. You always had to have them the same. And by me saying that, I mean this is 32. You could also have had this card as 128. So if you had 3, 128 plus 128, that brings the computer up for a total of 512 kilobyte of RAM. There are 4 different kinds of cards. There are 2 that are 32 kilobytes, and then there are 2 that are 128 kilobytes. And the reason there are 2 of each of them is, one is for if you have, which I have, the green screen, and another one is if you have had the color screen, because in order to use the color mode in the computer, it needs to have a dedicated area of the memory extension board to the graphics card. So the graphics card can read directly into the memory without going through any of the other components within the computer. So there exist 4. One is for color with 32, one is for color with 128, and the 2 other ones are if you just have the green screen, which I have. And you cannot combine them. So a future project for me would figure out a way to make a 128 kilobyte of memory boards and have 3 of them, and I will assume I can somehow figure out how this is working and then have those printed on PCB way, for instance. So let's put this one back in. No, actually, let's leave it out, because we were talking about the additional serial port down there, parallel port, and this is our video out. When it's a green screen, which I have, the 12-volt rail for the green screen comes directly from over there. If you had a color monitor to it, you needed additional power to the color monitor, and that could have been hooked up. I'm not sure you can see it if I go down in here. So if we have a look in there, there's a hole in the back of the cabinet, so you could have taken the power for that into the monitor via the power supply, the 220 volts directly into that one. So that's the same thing as with the Olivetti M20 and the other PCs in that area. This is what I think I want at the moment to talk about the board and the memory. I want to talk briefly about these. This is 16-bit expansion ports. You only have 2. So you need to decide on all the expansion possibilities that you can have to this computer. One, which I mentioned when I talked about the keyboard. I talked about you could have had a card put into this one, so it actually acts as a PC. So it was an 8086-2 CPU card directly on the 16-bit bus here. Another card you also could put in is the hard disk controller, because the floppy disk controller is built in to the computer motherboard, just like the Olivetti M20. So you can have the hard disk controller card here, and then instead of the 2 floppy disk drives in the front, you could have populated a hard disk into that. So the hard disk unit and the floppy hard disk controller was inside the computer. You could also, for this specific model, had a external unit with a hard disk on, with the same hard disk drive, which then leads up to this port. This port is just to take the cable through the hard disk controller outside the unit and into an external hard disk that you had outside. Very neat design. I really like that it's so accessible and it's very easy to look at. In the first or second video, I talked about that the computer was a bit flaky. It didn't work when I moved the computer. It is now working constantly. And that was due to the sockets that are in the computer. There are different kinds of sockets, and I'm pretty sure we are not able to see it. I'm not ripping this one out. This is very precious. But maybe if I zoom in a little bit, I'm not sure if you can see. It's actually two sockets, and you can't see it from here, but there are two different sockets for this CPU, and I am blaming this one for why it was flaky. So once I took it out, put it back in, the computer is working constantly. So that's this. Maybe I should talk about there are 8 spots up here for EEPROMs. And two of them obviously is populated. So you could extend them with your own EEPROMs. There are 4 in it from the beginning, and you could add additional 4 EEPROMs to the system, putting all your operating system or whatever you wanted in this computer directly on the EEPROMs. Very future-proof also. Let me put the lid back, and let's have a talk about the expansion possibilities for the computer here in 2022. I just want to mention the screen because it is a little bit of a quirk. So the resolution for this screen is actually built up by pixels. It's not a text mode, it's a graphics mode. And this graphics mode consists of 512 pixels this way and 256 that way. This means when you have a look at the actual screen in text mode, it consists of 64 characters by 16 lines. But as it also can run CP/M and MS-DOS, you also can switch this one into 80 column modes by 25 lines. So that's the screen, right? One other thing I want to mention is the graphics card. In order to have colors, and this computer can produce 8 colors, you needed to have 2 expanded memory cards in it, because one expanded card will give you 4 colors, so therefore you needed to have 2 in order to gain the 8 colors. And we're talking about these special version of the memory cards that are for the color monitor. So 2 cards for 8 colors, 1 card for 4 colors. Another thing I would like to mention is a little bit about the CPU that we have in the computer. The Zilog Z8001. This one in here runs at 4 megahertz. It was actually capable of running both 4 megahertz, 6 megahertz, and even up to 10 megahertz. Another thing about this CPU, which is why I really think that hadn't we had the IBM PC, this could have been a cool machine, because it could actually address the total of 8 megabytes on a PC. This model, specific model, was only capable of having 512, so a half a megabyte though. But we could have extended this CPU into 8 megabytes. The CPU, there's a lot of knowledge about the CPU, and you just need to Google this Z8000 CPU and you will gain a lot of information about that. But one of the nice thing about it is that it runs both 8-bit, 16-bit, 32-bit, and 64, because it could take 2 of the 8-bit together and combine that into 16-bit, or two 16-bit combined together to 32-bit, and so on. So there was a lot of potential into that CPU at that time. Let me reboot the computer. Right now it's in the PCOS 8000. That's the DOS, or the operating system. Let me reboot the computer, having the disk drive in it, because then we can have a brief look at the software it came with. So let me arrange the camera. So whilst the computer is booting from the floppy disk, I'm hoping we can see everything on the camera. Another quirk about the computer is actually the frequencies of the monitor. So the monitor, the graphics card, provides a vertical sync line of 68.2 Hertz and a horizontal line for 18.7573. I'll write the numbers so we can see them, and that's kilohertz. So it's not a standard, it's an own proprietary Olivetti standard for the lines. I'm hoping to be able in a future video to hook it up to a capturing device where I can set those values and maybe get it into another video about the computer itself, where we can see what's going on the screen. But for now, this is what we have. So as you can see, it has now booted into this German system. And let's just very briefly punch in some values so it can start. What this system is about, with the two discs that came with it, is a specific system for pharmaceutical recipes, or whatever it may be called. I am not sure, but as I have now looked into the data on the disk and the program, this is written in BASIC. I'm not gonna show you more, because I discovered that on this disk there are personal data. So we're not going into this one. I'm not even taking a backup, because this is about what recepts have you been ordered, medication and stuff like that. So this is probably a disk that I will have to get rid of, because it holds personal data. That said, let's break out of the system, and you can do that via Control-C on the keyboard. And if I just clear the screen and do the list, this is normal basic. You can see it's what you expect from a basic program. And here you actually can see that, you could prior to this also, that it consists of these 64 lines and 16 rows. So it's not a big screen, but I think this makes it very clear for users to see. And the screen, what I see on the screen is super crisp. So it's an awesome monitor anyway. Why we're now into basic, I would like to do new, and I would like to punch in a program that I have shown previously on my channel with the Casio computers. This is the computer program written in BASIC from Noel's RetroLab, where he is making a for loop that will actually explain how fast the computer can run. I know his program is intended for 8-bit computers, but I'm gonna use it on this 16-bit computer anyway, and we'll have to see the results. So let me just start punching in that. I'm ready. As you may have noticed, I made a tiny mistake and I had to backspace. So let me just try and show you. So punch in something and then Control H makes it go in. Control I makes a tap. So let's bring in a another phone so we can see how fast this can be done. So if I say run, let's say 5 seconds. So not very fast, right? I actually open my computer over there. Let's call up the Casio values. So the Casio, let me zoom in. So the big Casio PC took 1 minute. This takes 28.5 seconds. So twice as fast, but it's yeah, it's okay, right? Going through this computer has been a very positively journey for me. I really like it, and constantly just thinking about how would the future have been if people had recognized the Olivetti brand. It was spread further out and it came instead of the IBM 5150. But it's time for us to wrap up. I just want to mention 2 things. The first thing I want to mention is that I will bring this forward in the future, because you can actually get a hard disk controller and emulate on an SD card the hard disk for it. So I am trying to order this from an Italian guy so I can have a hard disk in it and see what this can bring. When I have all of that, I will then load it with all the programs that I can get hold on. There are actually a lot of programs, both just made from Olivetti text spreadsheets and whatever have you. There's also a lot of different languages, COBOL and COBOL and Pascal, C. There's a lot of software for this computer also. The other thing I eventually want to do, and this is why we're not going any further into the operating system, that's due to the mere fact I don't own a floppy disk with the disk operating system on it. This floppy disk that I've been working on is with the program, and it only loads the basic of the of the operating system. So I am waiting for another guy who has the floppy disk with the actual operating system, and he will ship this to me. Sadly, he couldn't get this before I'm ending this episode, but I will bring it back, and we'll also have a look at the PCOS 8000 operating system for this computer. So I hope you enjoyed this OliTober about this Olivetti L1 M20, and if you subscribe, you could then be notified once I'm taking this back in to the studio, and we will have a look at all these informations and extensions that I can get to this computer. So for now, I just want to thank you for staying, and see you soon. Goodbye.